Colorful sneakers, giant dolls, and Simpsons-inspired paintings might not sound like the kind of stuff you normally find in a gallery, but the artist KAWS has been redefining art for years. Today, how the artist has changed pop art for better or worse. I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, let's start our day with a little K-pop pick-me-up.
Yeah, I'm Thursday. 필요하게 till we surfing. 너무만 너무 고기. Suck out the music. 이니 미니 마니 모.
From the album Jack in the Box, that's BTS rapper J-Hope with his hit single, More. And if you look closely at the cover of that album, you'll see J-Hope cradled by these big, puffy cartoon hands with X's across the palms. And those X's are the visual signature of the artist Brian Donnelly, better known as KAWS. And that J-Hope album is just one of many ways his work has totally infiltrated pop culture over the last 2 decades, from Nike to Kanye West to a long line of limited edition designer toys. Now, KAWS is getting a major exhibit at the Art Gallery of Ontario. But not everyone loves the way KAWS sort of blurs that line between art and merch. And there are critics who think his work doesn't even belong in major galleries at all. To talk about this, we've got Sue Carter. She writes about art for the Toronto Star. And Sean Commandant, also known as Heistdro. He co-owns a Toronto art supply and designer toy store called Collective. Thank you both for being here to talk about KAWS.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, Sue, for those who are not familiar with his work, how do you describe KAWS's aesthetic?
Well, he started out earlier in his career working as an animator at Disney. So if you think about Mickey Mouse meets Elmo, he has his family, and the show is called Family, of these like kind of creatures that look like morphed all of your like favorite cartoons together. So it's really pop art inspired, but he pulls in a lot of different references. A lot of it is nostalgic too, I think. Like people will recognize it from their childhood, like The Simpsons or Elmo or sugary cereals. So, he's really playing off of contemporary pop culture icons.
I feel like Mickey Mouse meets Elmo is a really perfect description of the dolls, certainly, that I think a lot of people will be familiar with. Now, I saw the show on the past weekend, and there were, a big part of the show were these Simpsons-inspired paintings. What's he saying with that kind of take on this nostalgic, very familiar cartoon figure?
Well, here's the thing about KAWS is he doesn't talk a lot about his work. He's notoriously quiet. So I think that we're left to take what we want from it. I know that, if you think of the show being called Family, one might think about, The Simpsons being this dysfunctional family. They've been in our homes, and then he's put his sort of take on it with the X's for eye. All of his paintings, all of his dolls, everything have these X's for eyes. So, you can kind of read into it what you want. But it's hard to say whether it's a critique or whether it's, he's saying something else about this, or if it's just like a love of these icons.
Mm-hmm. It feels very opaque when you go to see the show. You're like, I'm not really sure how to interpret it, but that can also be very freeing, I think, for a lot of people. Heistdro, there's also an element of street art in his work, and that's obvious when you look at his background because he got his start as a graffiti artist in New York and Jersey. How did he kind of transcend that world to become an international art star whose work, and this number is going to shock, can sell for more than 20 million Canadian dollars?
Yeah, that's like, I would say every person who starts out doing art, their goal is to kind of like expand and grow and take that application into all different mediums. And I think starting off with bus stops and rooftops and alleys and doors and just, putting your characters up everywhere and doing it, and then eventually getting it onto toys or even tattoos, it kind of can just have this international, unlimited push of interest, and he's kind of just hit the nail on the head for him, right? And it's like, if you see a KAWS toy and you show it to anybody anywhere in the world, any different country, different language, different things, they might know it. They can recognize, like, he's been around for like almost close to 25 years. So he's coming up on that, like, of just this character that he came up with. And like you said, his where he started from, it's like he took all the elements of these things of pop culture around him and just kind of morphed into the one really super cool, interesting, seems to hit with a lot of people. I can't say it hits with everybody, but you can say that with every type of art and everything out there. But he's kind of taken it to the level, like, having an art store and dealing with artists. I've seen them come and I've seen them like start and try to do things. I see them try to paint on toys. I see them try to customize. And he really just is maybe the prime example of really making it. And the 20 million, can look like that's a lot of money to have your design and logo and your image created and expanded, and just a variety of different styles he has. He's really taken it to like to the highest level so far that we've ever seen with any artist out there that started from street art. And there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of them. And you mentioned the dolls, the toys, and I'm going to age myself, but I remember seeing them in people's houses 20 years ago. And if you go on the website now, this limited collection is already sold out. So who's buying these toys? Can you sort of talk about the KAWS collector? Because it's not your traditional art collector, is it?
No, it's not. It's definitely. And from me having, like I was explaining earlier, the tiers of toys from the Funkos all the way up, the KAWS is very hype beast, if that term's even used anymore. But it's very like people who collect sneakers, people who think they're looking for the grails and stuff. And it's just like he said, he started like 1999 was the first companion I think he came out with. And it's when you see it, it drops on the website. You go there, 11, you're sitting there with your laptop and your credit card. And then all these bots and everybody, it's sold out. And not only that, the image is already on eBay and it's already on StockX, and people are selling it before they even get it. You know what I mean? So it's always a lot of hype. And he maybe drops 200 pieces, 50 pieces, 100 pieces. I'm not sure what he does, how he does it for each different piece. But it's sold before it even gets there. Today, I actually have somebody coming to sell me their collection of KAWS. It's about 8 pieces. So I don't have any KAWS pieces here because they don't last in my store. And my store is from the lowest person who wants to spend $15, $10 to the person who wants to spend $1,000, $2,000. So that walks in the door and you just don't know. People maybe who collect KAWS think they're a little bit more cool. They're a little bit more, more rich or more fancy. You know what I mean? I think they think they're a little bit better than the average Funko collector,
Ouch. Okay.
Yeah,
Sue,
yes. Sometimes.
Sue, Heistdro, he brought it up himself. Not everybody loves this work. And, with this AGO show has come some controversy. With every show that he's in a gallery, people sort of, deride the work. They say that it doesn't belong in those types of institutions. So what's their beef with him?
I think that, he's had some really negative reviews in some like art magazines. I saw one, I was like, ooh, I didn't know we wrote like that anymore. I think that people have kind of conflated a little bit the toys and the merchandise and the hype around him with the art. I saw some things that I was really surprised by. I didn't think everything worked in the show. But for instance, he is aware of what people think about his work being in a museum or an art gallery, because he has these pieces that are like these figures, again, these Elmo-y figures, and they're cast in bronze. So imagine that and like the weight of that. And then he has them painted like a bubblegum pink so that they look like they're plastic. So he's really playing with this whole idea of like, what do we consider art? And when is it okay to be in a museum? So I hear artists and I totally understand, any artist's space is at a premium in terms of seeing exhibitions. And I know there's a lot of artists who would like to see like local artists or Canadian artists, or maybe somebody with something else to say. But I thought it was a really interesting show. And there's some really emotional pieces in it too. Like some of his paintings are really melancholic and kind of sad when you see these characters kind of floating adrift, in water, holding on to nothing. Or, there's another figure where, one of them is holding another one as if you can't tell if this creature is dying, is napping, taking him to bed, but there's a little bit more emotional resonance than I anticipated would be in the show.
Yeah, it was kind of a moody show. There were a lot of paintings that seemed very self-reflective, paintings from the pandemic where he obviously was going through it, if I can say that.
Exactly.
Well, I'm Emile Niazi sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. We are talking about the artist KAWS with Sue Carter and Heistdro. Heistdro, you're obviously a longtime follower of KAWS and his work. What's it feel like to see this kind of work displayed at an institution like the Art Gallery of Ontario?
Yeah, when I heard he was coming and it was his first time here, first thing I was like, hey, how do we get him to come to our shop? So we just ended up going to the show. But I was like, knowing that I've seen it and watched it for a long time and knowing that he came from graffiti, I went in there with not knowing what to expect. I was expecting the big KAWS pieces, and stuff like that. And I went in and I was thoroughly surprised to see like a lot of the nice artwork, the big canvases that he did, how clean they were, how the painting was really nice. And then just the placement of it. The placement didn't really blow me away, but just the pieces individually, if I was to look at them, I really thought it was dope because pretty much like what I'm into and what I surround myself with, it makes sense. But I completely understand that some people can walk in and be like, why is this? And I feel like that's with all kinds of art. There's so much art that I see that I'm like, I don't get it. A lot of the pop art, but I feel that KAWS is kind of like, it's good that he's getting criticized and people are questioning it and figuring out what's going on, because in many, many years from now, he's going to be looked back at as like, this guy really set the trend. This guy really hit the nail on the head and pushed things to different levels. And hopefully his show being there can influence other people. It can influence artists to try to find their idea and come up with their character and see what they can do. So I think it's really always good to bring somebody like that in, because I don't ever remember. I know there's been Herring and there's Basquiat and stuff. And it was really nice to see KAWS come in there, Brian come in there. And even Futura came and visited. And Futura is another artist that falls into that street art graffiti background and upbringing, right? So I'm always kind of happy to see that because it helps my store. It helps other people get inspired. And I think it's pretty motivating. It could be, like I said, I more have a problem with the fans of certain things than I do with the actual artists or the art.
Yes. I mean, when I was there were a lot of selfies being taken, but what's wrong with that? At the same time, it's democratizing and it brings people into these spaces where, sometimes they don't feel comfortable going into. Sue Heistdro mentioned Keith Haring. They're showing his work at the AGO in a month. Of course, we're familiar with Warhol as a pop artist. So what sets KAWS apart ultimately from some of those other artists we've mentioned?
Excuse me. I think that he's probably closer to Warhol than Keith Haring, and the AGO does have a show coming up of Keith Haring's work. In terms of Haring's work, there's activism involved in it. It was ultimately, he was making political statements, at the time, whereas I think this is also a reason why people might have a problem with KAWS, is that we don't know if he's making a political statement. Like, he kind of came up at the same time as Banksy. So you're thinking about that, and people anticipate that if somebody comes from a certain lineage that they're going to be speaking to something that he has a political message. But because he has allowed the work to speak for itself, we don't know if there is any sort of political message in what he's doing. If this is about our consumption, it's really up to us to decide.
Well, it's really up to us. And if you're in Toronto, you can check out the show. Thank you both so much for talking KAWS with us today.
Great, thank you.
Sue Carter is an arts reporter for the Toronto Star, and Heistdro co-owns a Toronto art supply and designer toy shop collective. The exhibition KAWS Family, like I said, is at the AGO in Toronto until next March.
Pero nadie sabe, no, lo que se siente, ey, sentirse solo con 100,000 personas al frente, Que de ti hable toda la gente sin saber un bicho, sin conocerte. Y hasta te desean la muerte, pero yo no, yo les deseo buena suerte. Sí.
I'm Emil Niazi sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You're listening to Commotion. And that music you're hearing now is new music by Bad Bunny. The megastar from Puerto Rico loves keeping fans on their toes, and last week that meant surprising us with a new album. It's called Nadie, Sabe, Lo que va a pasar mañana, and that was just the entirety of my high school Spanish, so please forgive me, and that translates to nobody knows what will happen tomorrow. And it's already breaking records. A day after its release, Spotify said the album is now its most streamed album in a single day for 2023. Suzy Exposito is a culture columnist for the LA Times. She joins me now to talk about the album. Hi, Suzy.
Hey, Emil. How are you doing?
I'm good. So you reviewed the album for the LA Times. What is the vibe? What are you thinking? Are you going to spend a lot of time with this record? Because it's pretty different from what we're kind of used to from Bad Bunny.
Oh yeah, it's it's probably his most introspective record. It's I think from the opening track, he addresses it head on. He's struggling with fame. He's struggling with being the most listened to artist, in the world right now. And the exposure that comes with that, what he's had to give up in privacy and intimacy, he's gained in money and in attention. So I think it's interesting because the Bad Bunny we've known in the past, it's someone who he's always down for like a good party. He loves a party. He also has been a super huge advocate of Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican cause. And, he's always putting on for the Caribbean. But yeah, here it's like, we do get a little bit of party on this record, but we also get a lot of reflection, and he's really struggled with, I guess like any artist of his caliber, he's struggled with the criticisms. He's a really sensitive guy. He's struggled with, having to counter narratives in the media or on social media. And so he wanted to set the record straight with this album. It
is really moody and kind of sad. I was listening to it this morning. And like you said, it's obviously a contention with the loneliness too that comes from fame. And, some of the lyrics translate to no one knows what it feels like to feel alone in front of 100,000 people. And it makes sense. I think there's a lot of artists of that caliber that feel that, but don't always express it and express it so early on in their career. Why do you think he's doing that now with this album?
Ooh, I think it's an interesting time for him, it is really isolating. He doesn't live in Puerto Rico full time anymore. He moved to the hills in Hollywood. He's dating Kendall Jenner, the model and reality TV superstar. And, he's learning English. That's like a huge thing, is he never wanted to learn English before. Yeah. But now, especially because he's been in a couple of movies, he was in Bullet Train with Brad Pitt. He was in Cassandra with Gael Garcia Bernal. And so he he's trying to really stretch the potential of his fame. He's living his life. As much of a bummer as this album is, at the same time, it's flavored with this like carpe diem attitude, where he's like, okay, if I'm going to be this famous, I'm just going to enjoy it to its fullest. The question is whether he's actually enjoying it.
Yes, that's a good question. Well, let's play a little bit more from the album. Let's take a listen to this.
Tony Kroos en Alemania, el que le enseñó a Harry cómo se hace magia. El más duro en PR, múdate pa' Pensilvania. Sí, sí, no te molestes.
That's a bit of the song Vaticano. You hear him reference the Puerto Rican salsa singer Héctor Lavoe there, and you wrote about this particular mention in your review. So who is Héctor, and what is the significance here of Bad Bunny singing about him and mentioning him on the album?
So Héctor Lavoe, like, he was a Puerto Rican salsa icon. You know, he was born in Puerto Rico and then moved to New York and became part of this like legendary milieu of salsa musicians. He was part of the supergroup called the Fania All Stars. And he just, you know, he was just such a powerful singer, with such a distinct voice. But, you know, like Bad Bunny, he previously sang about, you know, how fame was harming him. He was in the throes of a drug addiction, mostly heroin, and he just, you know, he used it to like numb, I think, his feelings of like loneliness and isolation and overexposure. And so it was like people started to turn on him. They were like, "Oh my God, Hector, like, get it together." And so his band leader and producer, Willie Colon, he asked Ruben Blades like to give him a song, to give Hector a song, like, okay, he needs a comeback song, basically. And so Ruben wrote the song El Cantante, the singer, which goes into, you know, like there are lines like, nobody asks me, you know, how I'm doing, if I'm suffering, nobody knows if I'm in pain. And, you know, Héctor Lavoe is someone who is like, who has spiritually informed a lot of Bad Bunny's music. You know, Bad Bunny always, he'll reference a lot of the salsa stars. You know, they were like rock stars in the 60s and 70s. And so he's someone who really inspired Bad Bunny from the beginning. And so Bad Bunny references him in Vaticano, and also, you know, the song Periódico de Ayer, Yesterday's News. He references that in Los Pits as well. So it's like Hector is someone who, granted, you know, lived a very sad life. He died of pneumonia, which was said to be a byproduct of living with AIDS. He died in 1993. I don't think Bad Bunny has hit that kind of rock bottom, but at the same time, it's like both, you know, El Cantante and then like Bad Bunny's new album really touch upon the alienation that happens, and especially, you know, for Bad Bunny feeling like, you know, trying to retain his culture, really holding on to his cultural pride through it all, even if he headlines Coachella, even if he, you know, like releases 5 albums in 5 years that do really well on Spotify. Like, it just, he's trying to hold on to himself.
I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and today on the podcast, I'm speaking with LA Times music critic Suzy Exposito about the new Bad Bunny album. So, Suzy, this, you know, we've mentioned it's a departure sort of tonally and emotionally, but there's also a difference in what he's talking about. You know, you've mentioned he's political. He talks about social issues, especially those that are affecting his home in Puerto Rico. So what's a bit different about that side of this new album? And you know, can you talk a bit about some of the political work he has sang about in the past?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he was really vocal from the beginning about, you know, championing Puerto Ricans, who, you know, the U.S. has effectively, you know, colonized Puerto Rico. And it is currently a U.S. territory, but, you know, they don't have the same voting rights that we do in the contiguous United States. It's like it's an island that's ripe for exploitation. And so you're seeing, especially after Hurricane Maria and after the failure of the U.S. government to adequately support Puerto Rico after the hurricane. I think Bad Bunny was super vocal about that. He went on the Jimmy Fallon show specifically to talk about it. And again, this is someone who like did not speak English before, but he like learned exactly how to say, this many people died in Puerto Rico, and like Puerto Rico is still suffering after the hurricane, to spread awareness. And so he's someone who became an advocate, especially with that cause, after the hurricane, but also he's been vocal about supporting domestic violence survivors. He's spoken out against femicide, especially in Puerto Rico, and against abuse. But he's also an advocate of the LGBTQ community. He like notably did a video where he was dressed in drag for the song Yo Perreo Sola, which was like an anti-sexual harassment PSA, designed for the club. But he, I think he tried to express solidarity with women and LGBT people. So this is like just, these are just some examples of his advocacy in the past, which he has done through his music.
And then let's talk about the sort of other side of, the trappings of fame. And that's that you can release a surprise album. Fans want to hear it so much so that it breaks records. And, Spotify says the new album is the most streamed album in a single day of the whole entire year. Can you just talk about that rise to dominance in music and why his appeal is so wide?
I think that a lot of it has to do with the increasing curiosity and open-mindedness of listeners today. I think especially millennials and Gen Z, they are so much more open to music in other languages. I just think about K-pop and how that has risen. Even though most of the artists don't speak or sing in English, there's still a huge audience for them. And I think a lot of it too is the talent, and I think commercially, Latin music has been doing so well because it's something new, I think people are ready to hear something different. And it's not like it was 20 years ago when like Shakira, to make it in the US, where she had to learn English just for anyone to listen to her, period. That's not really the case anymore. So I think that's a huge part of like what has propelled Bad Bunny, but also, he's got style, he's got swagger. That's universally appealing.
It is very appealing. I love that pearl necklace. A while back, Bad Bunny said he was taking a break from music to focus on his mental health, his physical health, and fans were kind of worried that he was going to actually retire. Obviously, he hasn't done that, but any clues on this album about I know we just got this album and it's so classic of fans to be like, what's next? But is there a sign to you listening to this about what direction he might be heading after this one?
God, I hope it's a vacation. I think it's so him that he hinted at retiring in his last album, in Un Verano Sin Ti, and ended up, releasing an album a year later. That's so him. But I think if Nadie Sabe proved anything, it's that actually he could have used a longer break. I think, it's 22 songs long. It's kind of a punisher, because some of these songs, it's like they echo on the same themes. He's been run ragged. And I think he could use a little break.
Well, I guess we would love to see him take a break, but not for too long. Suzy, thank you so much for talking Bad Bunny with us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Suzy Exposito is an LA Times culture columnist. You can read her review of Bad Bunny's latest on the LA Times website, and Bad Bunny's album is out now. A lovely bit of music from Carla Bley to take us out today. The American jazz composer and pianist died yesterday. She was 87. That music you're listening to now, that beautiful music, is a piece called Birds of Paradise off her 1993 album, Big Band Theory. Carla was an inspiration to so many women composers, band leaders, and musicians, even right here in Canada, where she's performed so many times over the years. She was also once married to the Montreal-born pianist Paul Bley. Carla was a pioneer of the free jazz movement. For more on her life and her music, go to cbcnews.ca. And that's it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of Commotion anytime, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thanks for listening.